go ahead virtually at this stage. And we're really excited to be supporting it this year as ever. So great to see young talent from all over the world. And we've got a little selection here for you today. We've got a couple of panels for you today. First of all, we've got Ottilie, Creative Director at the Romans, and the new chair of the PRCA's Creative Group, who's going to be leading a session of last year's winners from all around the world, talk about their experiences of the competition, give you a flavour of what it feels like to take part. Then I'll be back with a panel of senior PR professionals and creatives who'll give you some smoking hot tips of how to come up with really great creative ideas under pressure. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end for all the panelists. So please do feel free to stick your questions in the chat on the side. As I said, we don't know what's going to be happening with Cannes Lions proper this year, but we're absolutely committed together with ICCO to making sure that PR, comms and the earned creative universe is really well represented, whatever lovely activation we all come up with. So Ottilie, over to you to introduce your guests.
Hi, great, okay. So we will be grilling some former winners and getting their top tips on how they took home the gold. But to give you a brief overview of the competition, I'm sure a lot of you know, but it is 24 hours to come up with one idea that you then sell in 10 slides. So it's very high pressure, fast paced, but a lot of fun. And then when you win in your country, you get to go to Cannes and compete globally. So all of our panelists have got to some stage or another of that journey. So as Maya said, just put some questions in the chat if you want to pick their brains. I'll go to the panel to introduce themselves. So we go first to Candice.
Thanks, Ottilie. I'm Candice, account manager at the Romans, and I took home the gold last year and then was the runner-up in the global competition.
Katie.
Hi everyone, this is Katie from BBDO China. I won gold in China in 2018, and then I won gold again in Cannes. It's really an amazing journey, and I love to share with you all my experience. Thank you.
Paloma.
Hi, I'm Paloma from Budapest, Hungary. I won in Cannes in 2017.
Paloma actually beat me to gold in Cannes in 2017, so no hard feelings. Suzanne.
Hi, I'm Suzanne, and I'm a senior manager with Golan, and we represented the national Middle East and North Africa region in 2019.
And finally, Nisha.
Hi, I'm Nisha. I'm senior consultant at Hill & Dalton Strategies. I was with Suzanne when we won the regional round for the Cannes Young Line at the MENA region.
Amazing. So obviously it's a really tight turnaround. You've got 24 hours to turn around one idea, and you don't know what the brief is going to be. All you know it's going to be a global NGO. Is there anything that teams can do in the run up to the competition to practice in any way? Nisha, we'll go with you first.
I think especially with us, we wanted to practice. So we did look up a few NGOs to see what would they come up with. They didn't choose the NGO that we actually practiced with, but it was good to actually get some background on what they were doing, what the NGO trends were, what PR and communication tactics were going on around the world around these things. That really helps to prep.
And Paloma?
Actually, we didn't check exact NGOs, but we were looking for hot topics that were like in the media at the moment, and we were trying to figure out what topic will be that year, but we were completely on the wrong track. So I wouldn't say that was useful, but at least we somehow practiced a little bit.
I mean, I suppose you can at least assume that lockdown. Oh. Am I on mute? No.
We can hear you now.
Oh. Sorry, go on, Candice.
I think If you have time beforehand, definitely practicing responding to a brief in 24 hours. I think the timings are obviously super tight and it can be quite intense. So getting used to that pressure beforehand is great. I also think, practicing getting an idea into 10 slides is always really helpful. Just making sure that it's, really punchy and you're landing your creative in the right way. So I think that's really good experience to do before you actually do the competition.
Yeah, usually when we write an idea up, it's an hour to present it and 80 slides. So it's a difficult skill to be really concise. How did you begin to approach the brief when you get it? So you're handed this usually 10-page document from a global NGO, and there might be some strategy in there, there might be some audience, they might give you a few different territories that you might want to think about. But what is the first thing that you do when you're handed that, aside from sort of run around and try and find a cafe that you can set up shop in for the next few hours? Katie?
I remember the first thing we did is to fully understand the brief about the NGO itself and also about the relevant topic. We have to understand about this specific topic, what have been said and what have been not said in the public area, so that we can have a sense to judge what is the right or new directions. I think that would be a very good beginning.
And Suzanne, how did you begin to approach the brief when you got handed it?
So the first thing that when we got the brief, we took a very deep breath because we know that was going to be the last really deep breath for the next 24 hours. And what we actually tried to do was ask a lot of questions, because when you ask questions, you actually get to narrow down the target audience, the markets. So it puts into place a lot of a perspective that is usually a very wide brief. So when you narrow it down, it just helps you look for insights, look for things that can help build your strategy. Yeah.
And when did you land on your creative idea? So how much time should people allow to just sort of brainstorm, kick things around, think about, all the different wider territories they could land on? When should you start thinking, right, I should actually form the one idea? Nisha?
We started with one idea, we changed our idea, and then the final idea came to us at 2 a.m. So I think you should aim to get your idea before midnight, but be prepared to finalize it by about 6 a.m.
Yeah, Candice, I feel like you had the same sort of thing, didn't you?
Yeah, we our winning idea was actually one of the first that came out at around lunchtime, but we didn't decide to kind of run with it until I think 10 or 11 p.m. So I think make sure that you write absolutely everything down, because there might have been something that you've overlooked in terms of your creative, but definitely give yourself a bit of a deadline, because you don't want to get into the early hours still deciding what creative to go with, and obviously you've got to produce the deck and then you have the presentation the next day. So definitely setting yourself kind of a time limit is really useful.
Katie, when did you come up with your idea and how did you get there? Were there ideas beforehand that you had to throw out?
I think my experience is opposite with Candice. Actually, we do set up a schedule like by when we need to do what, but actually we can't satisfy with the idea. It's just like we feel that is not good enough, even though we come up with the idea. So finally, I remember it's 4 a.m. in the morning. We came up with the winning idea and we all scream, and the moment we know it's gonna win. So we spend the rest of the time executing, making that into the slides, but it's really exhausting. But at that 24 hour, you don't feel tired. I think that's the dramatic side of it.
Yeah, the adrenaline keeps you going. Paloma, how about you? How did you land on the final creative?
It was similar, as Candice said, that it was one of our very first ideas when we started brainstorming on the first day, but we were like thinking about it as a plan B. And we said that, okay, if we cannot come up with something better until, I don't know, it was like 10 a.m. in the morning or something, which we set earlier, then we will go with plan B. And then we went with plan B and we won. So I don't know, it was the very first thing which came to our mind. So, but I think there is no exact recipe to a deadline or to a time limit. It depends, but you have to set something because it can be hard to
Yeah, the time is trickling. And then sticking with you, Paloma, because I remember your idea was very specific in your audience. And I remember the feedback from the judges was that it was so clever that you'd hooked onto a fundraising moment in your country, and they could see how it would tangibly get results for them. Whereas other ideas go quite broad and they really hit an international audience. How do you think people should approach the audience split? Should they home in or should they try and go quite broad?
I don't know if it's the same now as it was back then, but we asked in the Q&A session if we can do something local or should we go global, and we had the opportunity to do the campaign locally. So we stick to this opportunity because we know our people a lot better than, for example, the British people, because we got the brief from the British Red Cross. But it was easier to work in the Hungarian environment, and then we extended it to the global level. So for us to find the right insight and to understand the audience, it was much easier or comfortable to think locally. But I don't think it's a recipe that works for all. But in our case, it was a lot easier.
Yeah, you just landed on a magical insight. Suzanne, how did you approach audience?
So when we looked at the audience, because the cause that we were working a brief on, it was from WWF, it was about deforestation. So it was quite a global conversation that was going around. And so that is why when you look at a global conversation, it's easy to piggyback on global events and tie that into your strategy. So that is the approach that we took.
And Candice, how did you approach audience? Because I feel like yours, you did home in on one, which was a bit of a risk, but it obviously paid off.
Yeah, definitely. So for the first competition, the audience was really, really mass. And I think obviously it can be quite tricky to ideate when the audience is, all adults in the UK or all adults globally. But we found quite a nice sweet spot that was within the Macmillan brief that said they've really struggled to target Gen Z historically. So we really honed in on that and we went for it, and we centered all of our creative and our strategy around that to really show how they could do that successfully. So I think, that did pay off. It's risky, but I think if there is a sweet spot, it's always worth looking into.
And in terms of working as a team, so you go into this competition as a pair. Suzanne and Nisha, how did you work together? Do you have different skill sets? Did you choose each other? How did it work?
So I'll start. Nisha and I go way back. We actually were in university together and we've been like best friends since over a decade. So we have worked together a lot in terms of our career, whether it was in university. So we have had that kind of a blend, and we understand each other's mannerisms and know when the other is going to get ticked off or not understanding the idea, which happened a lot. But in terms of skill sets, we're quite similar, but the way we think is very different, and the way we approach strategies and briefs is very different. So it's two completely different dynamics. So for example, I come from a very corporate background, whereas Nisha, I should answer this as well, but she comes from a very technology background. So it's a good blend of what you would say a team, I believe.
Yeah, I would just add to that to say, it's good to have someone so Suzanne's the more creative one, I'm the more process one. So it's always good to have someone who you can bounce ideas off of with, and then kind of have someone who put it down. So the one thing I would say in terms of finding a team member would be someone who you're not afraid to say, this is a crazy idea, but. So I think that really helped us.
And then for the 10 slides, it's tricky, right? Writing a whole idea and selling it in such a short amount of slides. Katie, any advice for people on how to make those really pop and sell your idea for you when you're not there?
Pardon the question, about 10 slides?
Yeah, how did you approach putting your idea into 10 slides?
I think at the beginning, it's going to be more than 10 slides, of course. So I think it's a process of like narrowing down and telling the story again and again, and try to imagine you're telling the story to someone who doesn't even know the brief. And I think that's the best task. And that will help you to simplify and tighten the story in a most comprehensive way and appealing, I think. Yeah.
Paloma, anything to add on 10 slides and nailing that bit of the task?
Actually, it seemed pretty hard back then, but since Cannes or since this experience, I do the same approach in my everyday work, because I try to be as streamlined and as simple as possible. So I think it's a really useful skill to develop, to be really on the point and not getting into these endless sentences and stuff like that. So I think it's hard, but it's worth it.
And then final question on budget, because this one comes up quite a lot, because in the brief, they do say, please provide a budget. Obviously, it's a charity, so you want to sort of do it pro bono and waive your fee. How did you address that in the 10 slides? Candice?
So the way that we split out our deck, we kind of had the upfront, a couple of slides on insight and strategy. We had like the middle section that was the creative, and then 3 slides on amplification. And that in the amplification section, that's where we really kind of outline the budget. I think it's important to remember that, you know, the brief is from a charity. So we try to be quite clever with the budget, and we, you know, in a lot of the talent that we popped in the deck or influencers that we wanted to work with, you know, we said that we'd approach this pro bono. So I think it depends on your creative, but I think, yeah, it's always important to make sure that you outline that in the amplification.
And we've got a few questions from viewers. So I only want to know, what do you think is the biggest time suck? So what did you find yourself accidentally spending maybe too much time on? And what are the sort of watch outs for falling into a bit of a rabbit hole? Paloma?
Well, I think what I said earlier, that we came up with the idea and we were trying to find something better and better and better, and then, okay, we stick with plan B. I think it's something you have to, I don't know, say a stop somewhere, because you always want to get something better and you feel like it's not good enough yet, but you have to set something, because in the end you are like trying to find new ideas and coming up with new solutions all the time. So I think that's the hardest part in the brainstorming, and of course, finding the right insight can be a bit time consuming as well. So,
which did you do first out of interest? Did you land on an insight and then the creative, or the creative idea and then try and make the insight?
We started with the insight, but not because I'm a strategist, because back then I was not. So it's just something that came naturally for us. But.
And Suzanne, how did you, what were the watch outs in terms of time sucks? Like, what did you spend maybe too much time on?
I think we spent most of our time designing the deck and making it, you know, putting that much effort into designing, because everything needs to fit into the 10 slides. But I think that's somewhere where we could have improved tremendously. But otherwise, it's just getting your idea down there on the slide, because it's not it is about the design, but it's not entirely about the design, because you do have those 5 minutes the next day to explain the creative idea where your passion for the idea would actually show. So that is somewhere where you could save time.
I suppose, yeah, only 6 people get shortlisted, so you do just have to try and sell that as hard as you possibly can, don't you? Katie, was there any things that you spent too long on that you wish you had sped up?
I just want to mention the things that people don't mention earlier. Maybe it's the debate with your partner, because I think it's within 24 hours, I asked a lot of young lion competitors, almost everyone had a fight with their partners, everyone, because it's very short limit of time and pressure, and it's understandable. But when you find yourself in a round and round debate with your partner, maybe pause it and think about whether it is a necessary discussion. If you realize it's not that important, just move on.
And then final question, we'll go to all of you. What's the one piece of advice you would give to young lions entering the competition this year? Candice?
I would say just have fun with it, I guess. I think this year, obviously, you're going to be doing it virtually, and that's what I had to do last year. I think it's so hard to be creative and kind of keep the energy high when you're doing it through Zoom. So I think, you know, just take a step away from it. If you're struggling, have a glass of wine. Like, it's such a great competition, you know, it's such great experience. I think it's important not to get too, you know, pressured or too anxious about it, and just, yeah, really trust yourself and be confident with your creative.
And Katie, advice for this year's competition entrance?
I actually wanted to say congratulations to you guys. And I know this is a very special year that we have been through the pandemic, and it seems like the world has been divided. And that's why this event is so meaningful, because Cannes Lion and Cannes Young Lion for us is always not just a competition or a place to celebrate work. It's actually, creativity is a universal language. And for us, it's a shared belief that, you know, pursue the excellence and to create meaningful impact to the public is what we are working for every day. So we are all the top young talents in this industry. And I hope that we all have hope and positivity and resilience to enjoy the competition as well as the everyday work. This is the way how we make the world better. And we feel like this is our responsibility as well.
Yeah, very well said. Paloma, advice for this year?
Well, not just for this year, but I think the most crucial part is choosing the right partner for this competition. So,
what's the right blend of partner, do you think? Do you think a creative and a strategist, or?
Well, we were both PR accounts back then, but as I don't know, someone else said earlier that you have to be with a different approach. So my partner was a lot more practical and I was the more creative. So I think that's the right blend, but it's not about job titles.
And Suzanne and Nisha?
So my one advice to like the future of Cannes Young Lions would be to keep it simple, because you never know. You don't need to complicate the ideas. As simple as you can get. If you can describe it if your idea in one sentence, I think you've nailed the competition.
I think for me as well, one thing that we loved doing was just going bold. Like, it's not limiting yourself to, but this is something that we wouldn't do in Dubai, for instance, or something like that. It's just actually going bold and saying, you know, this is something that could really make an impact, and that go with your gut on that.
Yeah, I agree, because I think a lot of teams think that they have to be very realistic with what they can achieve, but it's a creative competition. My advice would also be just go bold, go big or go home, and that's how you sort of get the attention of the judges. Amazing. Thank you so much for those pearls of wisdom.
Thanks, Ottilie. Brilliant stuff. Really good tips, panel. That was all really honest and lovely. So thank you very much. If you guys could take yourself off video, and I'd like to invite my panel to come up. That's Indy, Ruth, Rachel, and Scott. And I can introduce you to the guys who are, incidentally, all four agencies are on the judging panel for the UK Young Lions. So you're gonna hear what they're actually looking for, which should be valuable information. Right, do we have everybody? There's my gang. Hi. I'm going to introduce you all, so if you just want to give a wave, and then I'll dive into the first question. First up, we have Indy, the brand new Executive Creative Director of Ketchum, formerly of Edelman Deportivo and Weber, where we first met back in the day. Indy's been behind loads of award-winning brand creative work, including recent Father's Day campaign for Dove Men, which was a really moving Father's Day card that supported children whose Black dads have been killed by police brutality. And he's also an artist and writes for TV, absolute Renaissance man. Thank you for joining us, Indy, from there. Thank you very much. Next up, we have lovely Ruth, UK MD of We Communications. owner of an extraordinary menagerie of children and animals. And before being agency side, this is useful for you. I hope Ruth was a client at Diageo, quite a demanding client, I think, probably as well. So she'll have loads of insight into what clients are looking for from a pitch. Then we've got Rach, UK MD and EMEA president of fast growing global tech agency Clarity, who we've been keeping our eye on for quite a while. Lots of expansion plans. There's nothing she doesn't know about technology. And Rachel spent 19 years leading bike communications before she was poached to lead up Clarity. So Rachel, welcome to the team. And last but very much not least, Scott. We haven't met before, but hello, Scott. Thank you for joining us today. The creative director at Consumer Hot Shop W, where he's worked for nearly a decade, also producing tons of award-winning creative for clients. Really sexy client list: Adidas, British Airways, Camden Town Brewery, Levi's, Lynx, Marmite, Papa John. Oh yeah, you guys did the peanut butter Marmite, was that you? Yeah. Pot Noodle, Spotify, the Children's Society and Unilever. So there's nothing that Scott can't turn his creative hand to. As I said, all 4 agencies are on the UK judging panel, and we in Clarity are both, big shout out, official partners of our joint activation around Cannes Lions this year, whatever that turns out to be. It'll be fun. So thank you all of you for joining us today. First question, and I'll take this to Indy first, and I'll just kind of do the rounds with everybody, if that's all right, just because of the format today. How on earth do you come up with a creative idea under the amount of pressure that the Young Lions are under, just with that kind of one day to really kind of nail something sexy?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's hard enough when you've been doing it for a while. I think so. It sounds really obvious, but it's true. And I think when you're coming up with ideas, you kind of go around in circles a bit, but very often it's the first idea, the gut instinct that you go for. And for the process that we all have to go through, you go round and round, but very often the first thing you come back round to, which is pretty much the early thing that you feel just hits you, in the gut and feels right, is probably the right one. And that serves you really well because you've only got a sustained period of time to do this, right? You haven't got like a week, and you haven't got loads of check-ins and tissues. So I would say, for the purpose of that, it's often the best way to sort of judge what you think is the best idea. The other thing, and this is something that I'm sure a lot of the guys do, is really, once you've got it and landed it, and then it's a question of developing it so it feels like it's actually a formed idea or campaign, it's really the sort of the who, the why and the what. And I'm sure you guys are doing this. Deportivo, we did it all the time, and it was, if you can't write this in literally sort of 3 lines, then the idea is not going to sort of stand up. And I think once you've got it, it's like interrogating it so you can write it really succinctly in the who, the why and the what, and you've got it. And then it's just the fun bit of like, how does this come to life and how does it live? So it's like literally explaining it to a 6-year-old. If your deck, the run into the deck can be explained to a 6-year-old and they get it, that it's really tight. And because of the brevity of time, I would always say on anything you do, that's the thing, but particularly now, because you're constrained against time, it's the way to work where you can get really good results quickly.
Good tip. Thank you, Indy. I completely didn't realise Ottilie's meant to be on this panel as well. Ottilie, do you want to join us? Because you are an award-winning creative director in your own right. Sorry, it's rubbish of me, isn't it?
Oh no, late to the
party. Have girls and boys on these panels. That's the rules now. Thank you. What thoughts can I just come in and jump to you straight away? How do you think you come up with a creative idea under pressure from your experience?
I think actually you come up with the best creative ideas under pressure. I tend to find when you've got weeks and weeks to think of one, you come up with a blank, but when you're in this sort of high pressure cooker situation of 24 hours, you're sort of forced to do your best work. So I think it's also one of the panelists previously mentioned, it's not about just doing it continuously and then getting in a bit of a panic. I definitely think it's good to walk away, do something else, think about something else, and then just let it percolate in your brain, and that's when ideas just jump out at you.
Okay, cool. And Ruth, can I come to you next? It's your experience of creativity under pressure. Is she there? Oh, I think we might have lost Ruth. She said she had a dodgy connection earlier. Rachel, I'll come to you next.
Yeah, I think sometimes we find it's the cutting room floor ideas that, had we not put them on the cutting room floor, they're actually the ones we go with. So much as Indy says, the first or second ones are usually the ones that you're probably going to end up with. And we spend a lot of time saying, actually, the cutting room floor bits, pick those up and revisit again. Don't bin them too quickly. The other one that we've come up with is trying to ask ourselves, if we're really struggling with a brief and you've got lots of brains in the room and it just doesn't seem to be going, is can we ask ourselves some weird questions that might help us as a thought starter? So, what is the idea that would get you fired by the client? Put all of those up on a board and then flip them. See, actually, can you work with anything there? Sometimes those bits can help if you're really up against it.
Okay. Scott, what about you? How do you come up with creative ideas under pressure?
I'm going to be that final person that says it's sort of a mixture of everything that you've heard up to now, to be brutally honest. But I think Indy's bang on gut. I think gut 9 times out of 10 sort of stands you in pretty solid stead to get you somewhere. And much as Otti said, not trying too hard. As soon as you try too hard, you tie yourself in knots, because you try to be too clever and you're trying to unpick something that probably isn't there. So I think, as I say, particularly when you've not got a huge amount of time, simplicity is really key. And I think the other thing as well is a creative idea is only as good as you can sell it as well. So actually a lot of it should be felt, again, as sort of Indy mentioned as well, is that get to the idea and actually start working it through, because I think sometimes you think you've got a great idea brilliantly, but when you actually start to kick the tires on it, it can sort of quite quickly fall by the wayside because it doesn't work in a certain way, or it can't work at a specific point in time, or someone else has done it. Like, I think there's sort of quite a lot to be said of making sure that, especially in light of not having very long to pitch it to someone, you know how you're going to say it as well as what you're going to say. A lot of the craft is the salesmanship of it as well.
And just following on from that point, Scott, if I stay with you, what makes a great idea? Is it all about the creativity? How much time do you need to spend really understanding the client? Are they always looking for new, or how do you get the balance right so it's a viable creative idea?
If I knew that, I'd run my own agency. No, I think
I'll have the exclusive on that.
What's that? Sorry,
I'll get the exclusive on that. Obviously.
Yeah, fair enough. I think it's a real challenge, and it's sort of a boring point, but it's really brief dependent. It's really dependent upon what people are looking for. I mean, I'm sort of working on a couple of briefs at the moment, and each of them are different because based on what they're really looking for. I always think simplicity. For years and years, I tried to write really elaborate and articulate ideas that I always thought were genius, and I try and present them back to someone and I couldn't articulate it. And sort of Indy's point on, if you can write on a napkin, on a beer mat, on the back of a bottle, on a matchbox, that's sort of nailed on for work. It's worked for years for creatives, and it really is sort of a steadfast way of doing it. If you can nail it in a couple of lines, I think that's always the way for me. I think the other thing as well, as ever, is trying to find something clever that you can base it upon. It maybe gives you a bigger idea. So it is, can you find that little bit extra that maybe you wouldn't otherwise find, that makes you stand out versus someone different. I think that always one is for me, and I think that sometimes is the difference between sort of genius and something that's good is can you find that additional bit that sort of gives you, that levels it up just an extra little bit.
Indy, any advance on that in terms of what the difference is between good and great as far as creative's concerned?
Yeah, I think, I mean, Scott's totally bang on it. I think if anything, it's, and this is just like from the work we've been doing, recently as well, and we all do in our agencies day in, day out. I think it just has to be relevant. So, we always talk about kind of earned, and earned like doesn't really mean anything anymore. When someone says earned, I just sort of go, I don't really know what that means, because I think what it is, it's just culture first. Like, everything that we do has to have relevance in culture. I think as soon as you have an idea that has that and feels genuinely authentic, then it's better than any TV ad that you could write, and it's better than any TV ad that's going to go on. And that's why we don't write TV ads anymore. Like, I'm sure we've all done it, and we're just like, it just doesn't interest me, because it's just not culturally relevant. It's just kind of wallpaper, right? So I would just say, it just has to resonate of what's going on right now. It's got to be timely, and if it is, it just makes sense, because it's kind of at the zeitgeist, right? And it feels like suddenly you're doing something. So the idea might not even be that, it might be all right, it might be good, but suddenly when you put that lens on it, it becomes great, because it's of the now. And I would say that's just, I sort of look at everything through that lens, and generally it's a good lens to look through, because obviously we're in PR, right? And we need to make sure everything feels timely. So that's the only thing I would say that can level it up, maybe, and maybe a really nice looking deck and some nice visuals that go with it. But apart from that, that's probably the main thing.
Thank you. I think we've got Ruth back in the room. All right, All Church. What makes the difference between a good and a great campaign that really resonates with the client?
Oh God. Well, firstly, make sure your technology is working okay. Yeah, so what makes the difference between good and great? I mean, I'm a big fan of bringing emotion into it, and just, I think that makes it memorable. So it's so hard doing things on Zoom, as we know, versus in person. And I just think people have to dial up their emotion a lot more. So, you know, making things as kind of personally relevant as possible so that it stands out in the judge's mind always goes a long way. And I think when you're storytelling as well, the difference between a good and a great campaign is going to be, well, definitely making it culturally relevant, as we've just been talking about and hearing about, but it's just stripping the idea right back to its simplest core. And I know from the brief bit that I heard before I got cut off earlier that simplicity was called out then, but it just can't be emphasized enough, to be honest, because a complicated idea is generally, in my experience, not a good one. So I think stick with simplicity would be my advice there.
Okay, and Rachel, what about you? What do you think really makes an idea stand out?
Yeah, I mean, everything's said above, but you know, clients will always say, well, what impact is your idea going to have? I mean, really, what's it going to do for us? Is it going to give us a better reputation? Are we going to be famous? Is there going to be a behavior change? And they want to hear all these things. But I think the ones as a judge, when you read them, and most good, well put together creators will have a lot of that. I think emotion, which is what Ruth said, is one of the biggest tick items. You know, whose life is it going to change? Now, not all our creative campaigns, I can tell you, are going to change any lives, certainly in the tech sector, but they, you know, there may be that opportunity to do that. So I think if you're thinking about impact, the emotional bit is something that really, you know, it's going to tug at people straight away. That's important.
Ottilie, what about you? Any further thoughts on all of the above?
I think you've covered most of it. Simplicity is absolutely key. I would say a good litmus test is sometimes to run it past a normal person who isn't in our world, because sometimes you have these ideas that you think are so clever and we all congratulate each other and like, oh yeah, this will get an award. But then when you try and tell someone outside of our sphere, they're just sort of baffled. Yeah, so a good idea translates to the wider public.
Yeah. Can you explain it to your mum? Always used to be my when I was writing award entries for agencies around the world, if the summary didn't make sense to my mum, I'd have to scrap it. So that's always a good point. Do you think, I mean, traditionally, the Young Lions client is an NGO or a charity? I know it's not all official this year, but is there a difference to pitching a big brand idea to pitching a charity idea? Is there any difference in how you would approach that creatively? Scott, let me come to you first on that one.
It's actually interesting you say that. So, and you mentioned, I think the best way for me to probably explain it is through sort of something that I've done. But generally, when we pitch to NGOs or charities, we and I will approach it as if it is a brand brief anyway, and tackle it in that sense. So, the Children's Society, for instance, when we did the Store of Modern Childhood last year, the brief was sort of a traditional NGO brief, if you will, which was we're going to put a report out and we want people to care about it more than they normally would. And so we sort of took a step back to them. And I think that's probably why they came to talk to us over at agency as well, is that actually we approached it as if they're one of the biggest brands in the world. And I think particularly actually that year I'd been to Cannes, and one of the most amazing campaigns I'd seen was from ICCO, which was called Disables, which was the piece done by the guys out in Israel, which it's like one of the most incredible pieces of work going. And it was that whole entire year, and it sort of still is that the biggest brands with the biggest budgets with the smartest people in the world are now tackling societal problems that charities have been trying to tackle for years. And sometimes they're doing it better with more people paying attention and actually driving more cause and effect. So for us and for me, it actually made sense to approach it in that way. So if we were ICCO and we were going to work with the Children's Society or everyone else in that instance, how might we go and do that? And I think I would sort of say in that instance for people that are taking part this year, go and have a look from the last few years. Like IKEA have done some amazing stuff. Velux windows, of like you might think one of the most dullest brands ever, did an incredible piece a few years ago as well. And I think, so I would always say, from personal preference, I would approach it as if it was coming from a big brand, as opposed to an NGO, just because ultimately you're trying to drive cause and effect amongst the general population, and then way more used to seeing stuff from IKEA, Nike, than they are from sort of the UN or the equivalent. So I think actually if you can use that sort of almost as a way of approaching it, sometimes you can sort of find an easier way to communicate the issue at hand.
Good point. Ottilie, what are your thoughts on how you would approach an NGO brief?
I think it's important to understand when you read the brief what they're looking for. Is it fundraising mechanic? Or is it shining a light on a situation that maybe nobody's talking about, like for Amnesty International, for example? And then once you've identified that, going hard on giving them a solution, because at the end of the day, NGOs are looking to use comms really smartly to actually tangibly make a difference to the world. That is their whole reason for being. So I think if you can hone in on that, then you've got a good chance of creating something really impactful.
Indy, what about you?
Yeah, I'm 100% with Scott on this one as well. In terms of, I think the default can be when you hear that, and you know, if like, okay, perfect example, if you're working on a really sexy brand, immediately your mind just goes into what I can do. It's going to be really premium. It's going to look lovely. It's going to get all the eyes on it. And then sometimes when you think of an NGO, you can think the antithesis of that. It's just the way that, you know, sometimes the brain works. And I think it's a great opportunity to place them in exactly the same bucket. And just look at it exactly in that way. And if anything, you've got more of an opportunity because it's a challenger brand in some respects. You know, NGOs, you kind of think of them as, they're not kind of sexy, they're not, you know, Dr. Dre Beats, they're not Nike, they're not, you know, whatever, even IKEA, Scott was saying, but that's the advantage. The advantage is to get them to level up. And so whatever your idea is, get the NGO to level up as well, so they're playing on a similar playing field. So if anything, it's more exciting when you're doing something for an NGO, because you have the ability to kind of stretch a bit more and kind of take advantage a bit more and do something a bit more interesting. So I think use it as a positive. Absolutely.
Rachel, what are your thoughts in terms of how you would approach a charity brief?
Yeah, we've only done a couple of those. I think we definitely approach it very respectfully. I think you feel like you've got it's a really important brief to respond. And I think we've learned through doing the ones that we've done to listen very carefully to all the stakeholders. There tend to be more stakeholders involved on the charity briefs we've responded to, and different impetuses and different motivations for what they want to see. So I think for us, it's been getting that balance completely right between those that want something big and impactful and those who are actually just looking for an immediate response on it. So I love what Indy and Scott have said, you know, go big and give it to them. And I hope that we get more briefs like that, because I think you're absolutely right. They're the exciting ones. But you've got to manage that alongside all the various stakeholders who then get a say in actually what gets signed off.
Yeah, absolutely. Ruth, what are your thoughts on NGO briefs and how you guys approach them at WE in your previous roles?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think there's a distinction between brand or corporate and NGO in the way that there was. I think maybe 5-10 years ago, you know, they were treated very separately. The whole world of comms was also very siloed at that time, and it just simply isn't anymore. I think, you know, it should be treated in exactly the same way. It's kind of no accident really that all the big brands that we could probably name between us are trying to massively play catch up and dial up their purpose credentials in the way that charities and NGOs by definition just have in their DNA. That's why they exist. So I think where the landscape is now is really, really interesting, and there is no distinction as far as I'm concerned between charity and business in the way that there has been. So personally, I would just treat them exactly the same. I certainly know from Diageo days, I was there for 8 years heading up consumer PR across multiple kind of territories and markets. And really, we were permanently trying to partner with NGOs, permanently trying to borrow credibility in the charity sector or the NGO space. And that was quite a few years ago. And what we're seeing now is those partnerships have taken on a completely, transcendental lease of life, really. It's all about strategic partnerships. So I always look at it through the same lens, but also a partnership lens. I think that's probably the approach that I would take.
And while I've got you from that kind of client perspective, I mean, we touched on earlier on Ottilie's panel about about really bringing a bigger version of yourself to pitch on Zoom because it's so challenging. What are your tips for really making a virtual pitch stand out and sing?
Oh, well, I've seen some car crashes in my time, but I've also been in some car crashes. Having been agency side, it's just what happens, isn't it? I mean, I think this is so tricky because I would normally say preparation is king here. It's all about preparation. If you know your stuff, you're not going to come unstuck. And I would say that to any of my teams now going into a sort of normal pitch situation. Of course, time is of the essence in this one, and if you don't have time, you've got to be ruthless about what you're preparing. And I just think this whole 10 slide format is fascinating. Something that we're doing at the moment at We is a Japanese style of presenting, which works very well on Zoom, which, wait for this, I'm going to try and pronounce it, Pechakucha. Anyone going to correct me? Is that right? So I'm sorry if this has been mentioned already, but it means chit chat in Japanese, and it is about a fast format. So it's all about high dynamism, energy, getting through 20 images, each for 20 seconds, and it auto forwards. So you don't have a chance to sort of stop and get drawn into the detail. I find that kind of presenting style really exciting. It pushes people out of their comfort zones. It makes us think think in a much more precise and concise way. And personally, out of this whole lockdown, I'd love to see more of that. But this is a great opportunity for young people in our industry to just try out these formats and to be kind of ruthless about the detail. But for me, it's all about, as I said before, bringing human element into it, emotion into it, and just bringing it to life through being as energetic and as dynamic as possible. And I think formats can really help or hinder in that instance.
Scott, any thoughts on format and how to really bring a pitch to life when you're in this kind of very intense setting?
Yeah, I think a lot of the time what we've actually tried to do is which you're not going to have many slides anyway, but is actually drop the slides out. I think that the default is to try and hide behind the slides and to sort of not actually see anybody. But we spent quite a lot of time working it out and doing lots of different things. But it sort of goes back to the point, if you know the slides, you don't really need them. They're sort of there as guidance. And I think a lot of, again, to my earlier point, a lot of it's about salesmanship and sort of one person buying from another, really. So look, you're never going to get past some amazing visuals, or if you've got time to cut a reel for it. But I think that a lot has to be said for delivering ideas and thoughts with conviction, sort of face to face. If you know what it is you're trying to say, then there's no reason why you can't just have this format and have a direct conversation with someone, sort of, rather than go through reams and reams of slide. I think it's sort of simple as that. I think the other point as well is taking the opportunity to actually ask the audience that they're still following. When you're in a physical pitch in a room, you can read people's body language. You can see what they're doing. You can tell if they've switched off. You can tell if their eyes are glazed over. They're reaching for the Haribo or another can of Coke. But you can't do that in this format. So actually, sort of, okay, so that was the strategy. Everybody's still with me. Everybody still gets it. And then sort of move into the next section, like finding the opportunity actually to stick a break in there, which you probably otherwise wouldn't do. You're trying to get through a lot of slides quickly. As seems to prove really fruitful. We sort of had people saying, well, actually, maybe I didn't get that. Spend a little bit longer on it and make sure you're really landing those key points.
Yeah. Ottilie, what's your experience been of pitching over the past year?
I mean, it's a lot of tech issues, isn't it? So make sure your tech works. But I'd say that the single thing that I would put down, because Roman's teams have won Young Lions 3 times out of the last 4 years, and I'd say the single reason is humour. Because from the other side, when you're judging, it does get slightly monotonous sometimes when you're reading 40 to 60 decks and then you're listening to all these presentations, and when someone just chucks in a little joke, a nod and a wink, it's so refreshing, and you're reading it and you're like, I like these guys. So just something as simple as making it lighthearted can be what makes it win.
Rachel, you're nodding away. Does that work for you guys?
Yeah, no, I love that totally. I was going to say, often when we win a tech pitch, you do the first bit, but then actually we get called back with all the other agencies. Maybe there's a media agency, etc., to pitch to the investors. And actually, it's at that point you're given like 4 slides, if you're lucky, to tell the investors why you were the agency of choice and the creatives and how you did it. So I think this business of actually, if you've got to have slides at all, and I love Scott's idea, no slides at all, you've got to have your team all prepped to be able to do that. I think if you've can do it in less than 10, it is so impactful, and we've seen it happen. And the other thing I'd say is, don't always put your senior person in it. We've done a couple of these investor ones now with one of our young account managers, and she bloody nails it every time, better than I think any of the rest of us could do it. She's so passionate, she's so in it, and she's the one who's going to have to sell it and pitch it. So from that perspective, I think those are things that I think I would take away from this last year.
And Indy, how do you do the best virtual pitch?
Yeah. I'm sure all of us are just sick of looking at screens every day and looking at. So Scott said something really interesting. I've always told all my creative teams, and I still do, assume your laptop's going to break 5 minutes before a pitch. So therefore, don't rely on a deck. Like, I don't think anyone should rely on a deck. I think it's great. It's great to have, and you can reference it. But particularly now, I think it's not essential, and I think you're going to convey far more talking eloquently and passionately about an idea to someone, I say face to face, but obviously screen to screen, than referring to decks. The other thing I think, and aside from that, and I've done this quite a lot recently even, and it is a bit of a techie thing, you have to be careful, but it's just changing where I'm doing it. So I actually walk. I've done a pitch recently where I live, and I've walked down to where we live near the beach, and I've done it from there. It's on 4G, so it's fine. Like, I've got my headphones in and I've got it on my phone, and I've done stuff, and it's just really nice because when your camera's on, and you're just seeing something different, or even someone in their garden or in a different space in their house. We're continually seeing people in the same space all the time. Like, I mean, May, your bookcase is there. I'm sitting here with the wind. It's just breaking things up a bit, and it stays in your head, and it's really memorable that you're just seeing someone in a different environment. And it could be, and it's tricky, I know, because of tech stuff, but generally it holds up. If you've got the iPhone and your headphones in, and it's your connection's decent enough, I just think it's just really invigorating when you see something different on screen. Yeah. Like for the last year, we've been saying it's the monotony of seeing the same things over and over. So it's kind of a combination of what the guys have said, I would say.
Okay, cool. Now we're coming up to time. We did originally just put an hour in the diary for this, but I'd quite like to ask a couple of questions if everyone's all right to stick around for a few minutes. If you're not, then please feel free to go. But if the first panel want to come back in the room, then Ottilie and I can direct some questions at everybody who's been kind enough to submit their thoughts today. That's been really, really useful, guys. Thank you so much for joining. I've got a question from, put my specs on because I can't read, obviously. Question from Steve. Indy talked about ideas being of the now, but have any of the panels borrowed creative ideas from the past and reinvented them successfully for clients? Are there any examples which you think young lions could use for inspiration? That's a good question. Anyone want to go with that one? Do just raise your hand.
So I can take that question. So for our national, for the regional level young lions, so the idea was to get the older generation back into the workforce, because in the UAE, they have a rule that after 65, there is a retirement. So you don't have the senior people working. So how to get them back. And also because of, this basically for Alzheimer's. So we borrowed an idea from The Intern, the movie, and we called it the return ship. And we created a business plan and a model around that idea, which actually won us the regional gold.
That's cool. Any other thoughts on repurposing old ideas or classic ideas for, does that count as creativity? It sounds like it does.
I would just jump in on to the point on that Ottilie made earlier about if the ambition is to go for sort of for humour and it fits the brief, then finding something to parody is always, and sort of as Suzanne touched on, is always a great way of doing it. Particularly for something like an NGO to play around with as well. There's probably sort of the classic marketing tropes that are always quite fun and sort of easy analogies to toy with and play with. I think as ever, it will sort of come down to the brief that's presented, but I always think that there's merit in playing around with sort of, say, the biggest brands in the world, because it comes back to that point again of that we've all talked about, is that everyone knows who they are, what they do and what they see in front of them. So if you've got a clever adaptation of Nike's Just Do It line and it feels like it works the campaign you're trying to build, then go with it, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with your parody point. If you're acknowledging the first idea and you're like deliberately doing a riff off it, great. If you are just doing an idea that's been done before but not acknowledging it, then when I've been judging in the past, I've just chucked those straight out the window. So that I cannot stress this enough. Google if it's been done before you put it in a deck. And everybody comes unstuck with this. I've had it before a pitch when I've Googled it and been like, oh God. So just make sure you do it.
Yeah, I think anyone who's been a judge has been in that situation. Otley, do you want to take any questions for your creative panel specifically?
I actually sort of weaved them in when we were talking, so I don't think there's anything in there that we didn't cover.
I had an additional one actually. What are clients' pet hates when they're being pitched? From your experience, anything that's really wound clients up? Any of you?
Rubbish ideas.
Rubbish ideas. So the opposite of all the good stuff, Scott.
Yeah, exactly. I think the thing that annoys me was not caring enough. I think some of those, I think there's a lot of excitement. Like clients have a lot of excitement, particularly when they're going to find a new agency, and that matters. But it's a big process for them. Sometimes, like the procurement's been going on for months and months and months, and so I think that whilst we have to do it all the time, and look, I'm sure it's killed all of us at one time or another, but you always need to remember that it's probably really exciting for them, whilst it might be exciting to begin with for you, but then you're 3 weeks in and you're still up at 11 o'clock before the 7 o'clock pitch the next morning. But I think there's just that level of sort of showing that you care. I think when you show you don't care because you've neither not bothered to reference who they are properly or you've missed something, I think that's when clients get particularly annoyed or irritated.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts on what really winds clients up? Just as an FYI.
I think I was going to say it's not what winds them up. It's kind of the opposite, actually, in that I don't think I've ever been berated for being brave, presenting or risk taking. I think, the idea might be completely wrong and you might just, leave going, it was an absolute nightmare, we have to start again. But I don't think, any client would ever berate you for not coming in, with a really brave idea that's going to try and change the dial, in terms of their brand. So, and this is a great opportunity to do that, I think.
Okay, cool. Guys, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you all so much for contributing to both those panels. That was really great tips from experience and for really senior creatives and agency bosses on both of those panels. So thank you all so much. Massive amounts of good luck to everybody in editions this year. I suspect we've maybe got some winners among us here today after all those tips. So Rob, did you want to just wind up and talk about the next thing we're doing? Is he still there?
I am still here. Just to remind everyone that for the UK competition, the deadline to get your entries for your teams in is Thursday. And for some of the other competitions, I think UAE and Singapore is over the next couple of weeks. So just don't miss the deadline. Just a reminder.
Cool. Thank you all very much for joining us. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.